After paying for their IVF treatments, I was asked not to visit the baby. My daughter-in-law said, "You did your job, now go be forgotten." My son said, "We need boundaries." The next week, she posted online that I was too toxic to be around a child. What she didn't know was that the financial agreement she signed had a clause that would. "Please don't come by anymore." Those were the words that came out of Lion's mouth as she stood in the doorway of the house I had helped them buy, holding the baby I had paid to create, looking at me like I was some stranger who had overstayed their welcome. The gift basket in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I could see the soft pink blanket I had spent hours picking out at the boutique downtown, the organic baby lotion I had researched for weeks to make sure it was the gentlest formula, the handmade rattle from that artisan shop I had driven 2 hours to visit. All of it suddenly meaningless. "I'm her grandmother," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how desperate. Lion shifted the baby higher on her shoulder, creating more distance between us, and said something that would replay in my mind every single night for weeks to come. "You were our help, you did your job, now go be forgotten." Behind her in the hallway I could see Daniel, my son, my only child, standing there with his hands in his pockets, staring at the floor like a coward. "We need boundaries, Mom," he said without looking up. "This is what's best." The door closed before I could form another word, before I could process what was happening, before I could beg or argue or demand the respect I deserved. I stood there on that porch for what felt like an eternity, staring at the wreath I had bought them last Christmas still hanging on the door, and something inside me cracked wide open. I am Evelyn Carter, and I am 62 years old, and I have spent my entire life being the person everyone could count on, the one who fixed problems, the one who made sacrifices, the one who held everything together even when it meant I was falling apart inside. My husband left me when Daniel was 12, walked out the door one Tuesday morning and never came back, and I raised that boy alone, worked 2 jobs, went without so he could have everything he needed. I put him through college, helped with his wedding, supported every dream he ever had, and when he and Lion came to me 3 years ago with tears in their eyes saying they couldn't conceive naturally, saying the treatments were too expensive, saying they didn't know what to do, I didn't hesitate. I opened my retirement account and I gave them $78,000 for their fertility treatments because that's what mothers do, that's what love looks like, or so I thought. But here's the thing about me that I've never been good at admitting, the flaw that runs through everything I do like a crack in foundation that eventually brings the whole house down. I can't just give freely. I need control. I need guarantees. I need to know that my sacrifice means something permanent, something that can't be taken away. So when I wrote that check, I didn't just write it, I made them sign an agreement. Daniel laughed when I brought out the paperwork, said, "Mom, this is ridiculous, we're family." But I insisted, and eventually they both signed because they needed that money more than they needed their pride. The agreement stated that my financial support was contingent on reasonable familial access and involvement, to be mutually upheld, and that any breach would trigger full reimbursement within 30 days. Lion rolled her eyes, but she signed her name right there on the line, and I filed that document away feeling secure, feeling smart, never imagining I would actually need it. That night after they slammed the door in my face, I drove home in a fog, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my mind spinning in circles trying to understand what had just happened. I made myself a cup of tea that went cold on the counter while I sat at my kitchen table staring at nothing. Then my phone buzzed, a notification. Lion had posted something on social media and I had been tagged. My hands were trembling as I opened it. "Some people think money gives them access," she had written. "Not around my child. Toxic is still toxic, even if it's family. Setting boundaries is healthy and necessary. To everyone dealing with difficult relatives, you don't owe anyone your peace." The post already had hundreds of likes. Comments were flooding in. "Good for you, Mama Bear. Blood doesn't mean they get to treat you badly. Protect that baby from toxic people." I read every single comment, my chest getting tighter with each one, my breathing becoming shallow. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that I had funded their entire life, that without me there would be no baby, no house, no comfortable existence. They saw me as some villain in Lion's story, some overbearing mother-in-law who deserved to be cut off. I wanted to scream. I wanted to comment and tell everyone the real story. My finger hovered over the keyboard for 10 full minutes before I stopped myself. That's what she wanted. She wanted me to look unhinged and desperate. So instead I took a screenshot, saved it with a timestamp, and opened my desk drawer where I kept all my important documents. The agreement was right where I had filed it 3 years ago, pristine and official and legally binding. I pulled it out and read every word slowly, carefully, and for the first time since that door had closed in my face, I smiled. The next morning I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to be emotional about this. I wasn't going to beg or cry or make a scene. I was going to be methodical because that's where my real power lived, in the details, in the planning, in the careful execution of a well-thought-out strategy. I made myself breakfast, actually ate it, and then I sat down at my computer and began documenting everything. I created a folder on my desktop labeled Family Matter, And inside I put screenshots of Lyon's post with all the comments, screenshots of previous text messages where they had thanked me for my generosity and promised I would always be part of their lives, copies of bank statements showing the exact amounts I had transferred for their treatments, photos of all the baby gifts I had purchased over the months, records of every visit I had made. I was meticulous. I was thorough. And yes, maybe I was also becoming a little obsessed because I kept going back to that social media post, reading it over and over again, each time feeling that knife twist deeper into my chest. Toxic is still toxic even if it's family. The words burned. My flaw was showing itself again, that need for validation, that inability to let go, that deep-seated fear that maybe she was right, maybe I was the problem. But then I would remember that closed door and my resolve would harden again. Daniel called me on day 3. I let it ring 4 times before I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Hello, Daniel. There was a pause and I could hear him breathing, could picture him packing in his kitchen the way he used to pace before difficult conversations even when he was a teenager. Mom, we need to talk, he said finally. Do we? I kept my tone light, almost pleasant. You seemed pretty clear the other day. You're making this worse by being silent, he said, and I could hear the frustration creeping into his voice. Am I replied calmly, or am I just no longer playing your game? It's not a game, Mom. We set a boundary and you need to respect it. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised even me. A boundary? Is that what you're calling it? You took my money, you let me buy everything for that baby, you smiled to my face while you planned to cut me out. That's not fair, he protested. You gave that money as a gift. Did I? I let the question hang there. Actually, Daniel, if you remember correctly, you signed an agreement. You both did. The silence on the other end was delicious. What are you talking about? His voice had changed now, uncertain. I'm talking about the legal document you and Lyon signed before I released the funds for your fertility treatments. The one that specifically states my financial support is contingent on reasonable familial access and involvement. Mom, that was just a formality, it didn't mean anything. Then you won't mind when my attorney sends you the formal notice, I said sweetly. Notice of what? Now he sounded scared. You'll see, check your mail in a few days. And I hung up. Just pressed the end button and set my phone down, and felt a rush of power that was probably unhealthy, but felt absolutely necessary in that moment. I knew I was going too far. That's another one of my flaws, the inability to stop when I should, the tendency to push until something breaks. A healthier person would have tried to have a calm conversation, would have suggested family therapy, would have taken the high road. But I had been taking the high road my entire life, and where had it gotten me? Standing on a porch being told I was forgotten. So I contacted an attorney, a woman named Melissa Vance who had a reputation for being sharp and unsentimental. I sat in her office with its leather chairs and impressive bookshelves and laid out everything. She read through the agreement carefully, asked me pointed questions about my intentions, and finally leaned back in her chair. This is enforceable, she said. You could absolutely invoke the reimbursement clause. But Mrs. Carter, I have to ask, is this really what you want, to sue your son? I don't want to sue him, I said. I want him to remember what respect looks like. I want them to understand they can't just use people and throw them away. She nodded slowly. All right then, let's send them a letter. The letter was beautiful in its precision. It outlined the breach of agreement, cited the social media post as evidence of denied familial access, referenced the specific clause about reimbursement, and demanded full repayment of $78,000 plus associated costs within 30 days. When Melissa showed me the draft, I felt a moment of doubt, a whisper in my mind asking if I was really going to do this, if I was really going to threaten my own son over money. But then I remembered Lyon's face in that doorway, that casual cruelty in her voice, and I told Melissa to send it. The letter arrived at their house on a Tuesday. I know because I had requested tracking. I watched on my computer as the status changed to delivered, and then I waited. It took 6 hours before my phone rang. Daniel again. This time I let it go to voicemail. He called back immediately. I let it go to voicemail again. On the third call I answered. Mom, what the hell is this? His voice was shaking with anger. What is what, sweetheart? I kept my voice sugary sweet. You know exactly what I'm talking about. This letter from your attorney. You're seriously threatening to sue us. I'm not threatening anything, I said calmly. I'm simply enforcing the terms of our agreement. You and Lyon signed it. You agreed to the conditions. You violated those conditions. Therefore, reimbursement is required. It's all very straightforward. This is insane. You can't be serious about this. I'm completely serious, Daniel. You have 30 days. And have that kind of money. We have a newborn, we have a mortgage, we have bills. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to cut me out of your lives, I said, and I could hear the ice in my own voice. This is blackmail, he shouted. No, this is a legal contract that you willingly entered into. There's a difference. I heard Lyon's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. Is that her? Is she really doing this? Daniel's voice became muffled as he must have covered the phone. I could hear them arguing, her voice getting louder, and then Daniel was back. Mom, please, can we just talk about this like adults? I tried to talk. I brought a gift basket. You closed a door in my face and then your wife publicly humiliated me online. So no, Daniel, I don't think we can talk about this like adults because adults don't behave the way you two have behaved. You're really going to do this. You're really going to destroy your relationship with your son over this. And that's when I felt it, that little crack in my armor, because the truth was I didn't want to destroy anything. I wanted them to hurt the way I was hurting. I wanted them to feel desperate and powerless and small, but was I willing to lose my son forever? I pushed the doubt away. You destroyed our relationship when you told me to be forgotten, I said quietly. I'm just making sure you remember the cost of that decision. And I hung up again. The next few days were torture. My confidence would surge and then crash. I would convince myself I was doing the right thing and then spend hours questioning everything. I barely slept. I stopped eating regular meals. I must have reread that social media post 100 times, working myself into a fury each time, and that's my biggest flaw showing itself again, that obsessive need to justify my actions, to make myself the victim, to hold on to anger because letting it go would mean admitting I might be wrong. My friend Patricia called to check on me and I told her everything. Evelyn, she said carefully, I understand you're hurt, but this seems extreme. Maybe you should take a step back. You don't understand, I snapped. You have 3 kids and 7 grandchildren, and nobody has ever tried to erase you from their lives. No, but I also don't have legal contracts with my children. That's not normal, Ev, that's a control issue. I hung up on her too. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone who cut off anyone who disagreed with me, someone who couldn't see past their own pain. But I couldn't stop. The momentum was carrying me forward, and I was terrified of what would happen if I stepped off this path. Would I just be that sad old woman who got used and discarded? Would Daniel and Lion win? The thought was unbearable, so I kept going. I checked in with Melissa daily. I documented every phone call, every voicemail, every text message. When Lion sent me a message that said, "This is cruel and you know it," I screenshot it and added it to my folder. When Daniel sent a message begging me to reconsider, I screenshot that too. I was building my case brick by brick, and somewhere in the back of my mind I knew I was going too far, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. On day 12, Lion called me directly. I was so surprised I almost didn't answer. "What do you want?" I said coldly. "We need to talk in person." Her voice was different, less aggressive, almost defeated. "I don't think that's a good idea. Please, Evelyn, we can't afford what you're demanding. We just can't. We need to figure something out." There was something satisfying about hearing the desperation in her voice, but also something that made me feel sick to my stomach. "You should have thought about that before you humiliated me publicly," I said. I know, okay. That post was wrong. I was wrong. I was tired and overwhelmed, and Daniel's mom, I mean you were coming over every single day, and I felt smothered, and I lashed out in the worst way possible, and I'm sorry." It was the first time she had apologized. I wanted to feel triumphant, but instead I just felt empty. "You told me to be forgotten," I said quietly. "I didn't mean it like that. I meant we needed space. New parents need space, but I went about it all wrong, and I'm sorry. And the post, the one where you called me toxic, I'll take it down. I'll post a clarification. I'll do whatever you want, just please don't make us pay you back. We can't. We'll lose everything." And there it was, the power I had been seeking. The acknowledgement that I was essential, that I couldn't be erased, that I mattered, but it felt hollow. "I want to see my granddaughter," I said. "Regularly, not every day, I understand that was too much, but regularly. And I want the public humiliation addressed, not just the post taken down, a real acknowledgement of what you did." "Okay," Lion said quickly. "Okay, we can do that. And I want Daniel to apologize, in person, for standing there like a coward while you said those things to me." There was a pause. "He will. He knows he messed up. Then have your attorney contact mine. We'll work out terms." After I hung up, I sat in my silent house and wondered if I felt better. I didn't. I felt like I had won a battle, but lost something I couldn't quite name. The negotiations took 2 weeks. Melissa handled most of it, but kept me updated on every detail. They agreed to a schedule of visits, twice monthly to start, with flexibility for holidays and special occasions. They agreed to post a public clarification on social media. They agreed to a written apology from Daniel. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue reimbursement and to provide reasonable notice before visits. It was all very clinical, very legal, very cold. The day we finalized everything, I drove to their house for our first scheduled visit. My hands were shaking as I knocked on the door. Daniel answered. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, his hair unwashed, his shoulders slumped. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Hi, Daniel." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, and then he stepped aside to let me in. Lion was in the living room with the baby. She stood up when I entered, holding my granddaughter against her shoulder. "Thank you for coming," she said formally. "Of course." The baby was beautiful. I had only seen her that one time on the porch, and she had already grown so much. She had Daniel's nose and Lion's dark hair, and she was perfect. "Would you like to hold her?" Lion asked, and I nodded because I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. She placed the baby in my arms carefully, like she was handling something fragile and dangerous at the same time. The baby's weight was warm and solid and real, and I looked down at her tiny face and felt nothing like I thought I would feel. There was no surge of joy, no overwhelming love, no sense of victory, just a heavy, complicated sadness. It's beautiful, I managed to say. Her name is Sophie, Daniel said. We haven't officially told you yet. Sophie, I repeated, testing the name. That's lovely. We sat down in their living room and the silence was oppressive. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, I need to say something. I'm sorry for how we handled everything. I'm sorry for not standing up for you. I'm sorry for letting Lion say those things. I was caught between you both and I took the coward's way out. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a man who was trying his best but still failing in so many ways, just like I had been doing my whole life. I'm sorry too, I said, and I meant it. I went too far with the legal threats. I was hurt and I wanted you to hurt too, and that was wrong. Lion shifted uncomfortably. I took down the post, she said, and I posted a clarification. I said that family conflicts are complicated and sometimes misunderstandings happen and we're working toward healing. I said I had seen it. I had read every single comment on that post too, watched as people who had previously supported her now questioned her story, asked what really happened, turned on her just like they had turned on me. It should have felt good, but it just felt exhausting. And I really am sorry, Evelyn, Lion continued. I was overwhelmed and scared and I took it out on you. You've been incredibly generous to us and I lost sight of that. I was also overbearing, I admitted. Coming over every single day was too much. I know that, I wanted to be needed. You are needed, Daniel said, but maybe in a different way than you were thinking. Maybe, I agreed. I stayed for an hour. We made awkward small talk. I gave Sophie back to Lion when she started fussing. We agreed on the date for my next visit. When I got up to leave, Daniel walked me to the door. Are we okay? He asked quietly. I don't know, I said honestly. I think we will be eventually, but right now everything feels broken. He nodded, his eyes red. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. I drove home and spent the evening sitting in my kitchen thinking about everything that had happened. I had gotten what I demanded. Access to my granddaughter. Public acknowledgement that I wasn't the villain, an apology from my son, but none of it felt the way I thought it would. The victory was empty, the validation was hollow. I had been so focused on enforcing my rights, on making them understand my worth, on controlling the outcome, that I hadn't stopped to consider what I was actually destroying in the process. The relationship I had with Daniel before all this was gone. The easy warmth, the spontaneous phone calls, the feeling that I was wanted and not just tolerated, all of it was gone and might never come back. I had won the contract but lost the connection. Over the next few months, I visited Sophie according to our schedule, twice a month like clockwork. The visits were polite and strained. Daniel and Lion were always cordial, always appropriate, always careful. We never talked about anything real. We never laughed. We never had those moments of genuine connection that I had dreamed about when I imagined being a grandmother. Everything was performed for the benefit of our agreement. I brought gifts at every visit, expensive, thoughtful things that Sophie was too young to appreciate. I took photos that I posted on my own social media to show everyone that I was involved in my granddaughter's life. But the truth was I felt like a stranger. Sophie didn't reach for me the way she reached for her parents. She didn't light up when I walked in the room. She tolerated me the same way Daniel and Lion tolerated me, because that's what I had reduced us all to. Tolerance instead of love. One evening after a particularly awkward visit, I sat in my car outside the house for a long time before driving away. I watched through the window as Daniel and Lion moved around their living room with Sophie, laughing about something, being a family in a way that didn't include me and never really would. I had paid for that life. I had made it possible, but I wasn't part of it, not really. I was an obligation now, a box to check on their calendar. I thought about the agreement sitting in my filing cabinet at home, that piece of paper I had clung to like it could protect me from being forgotten, and I realized how foolish I had been. You can't contract someone into loving you. You can't legally mandate genuine connection. All I had done was guarantee my physical presence while destroying any chance of emotional closeness. My need for control, my fear of abandonment, my inability to give freely without strings attached, all of my flaws had combined to create exactly the outcome I had been trying to prevent. I was alone. I was needed but not wanted. I was part of Sophie's life, but I would never be a beloved grandmother. I would be the grandmother they saw twice a month because a legal agreement said they had to. When I got home that night, I pulled out the agreement and I read it one more time, really read it, and I saw it for what it was. Not protection, not security, not love, just paper, just words, just my desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable. I thought about tearing it up, but I didn't. I filed it away again because that's who I am. Someone who holds on to things long after they've stopped serving any purpose except to remind me of my own failures. Now it's been almost a year since that door closed in my face. I still see Sophie twice a month. I still bring expensive gifts. I still take photos and post them online. Daniel and Lion are polite. We follow the terms. Everyone does exactly what they're supposed to do, and it's absolutely miserable. I watch other grandmothers at the park with their grandchildren and I see the spontaneity, the joy, the ease, and I know I will never have that. I had a chance at it once, but I destroyed it with contracts and legal threats and my pathological need to control every outcome. The worst part is I don't even know how to fix it now. The damage feels permanent. Sometimes I think about calling Daniel and telling him to tear up the agreement, that I don't need scheduled visits, that I just want to be invited when they want me there. But I'm terrified of what would happen if I gave up the one thing guaranteeing I see Sophie at all. What if they stop inviting me? What if I become truly forgotten? So I stay trapped in this prison of my own making, seeing my granddaughter on a schedule, never getting too close, never being too much, always following the rules I created. Last week Sophie took her first steps. I found out about it on social media. They didn't call me, they didn't think to include me in that moment. Why would they? I'm not part of their spontaneous joy. I'm a twice-monthly visitor. That night I sat in my perfect quiet house, surrounded by all my careful planning and control, and I cried for the first time since this all started. Not angry tears, not vindictive tears, just sad, tired tears for everything I had lost while trying so desperately not to lose it. I got exactly what I wrote down on that agreement. Access, terms, boundaries. I got my rights enforced and my dignity defended and my value acknowledged. But I lost my family. And no contract in the world can give that back.